Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. This is the podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and speak with innovators leading the charge. Today's guest is Meei Wong, CEO of Circle Digital Ventures, a company focused on improving the lives of seafarers through technology. Circle DV has developed a suite of solutions aimed directly at the human side of shipping, from SOL.X, a control of work and crew well-being platform, to CDV Health, a telehealth solution for seafarers at sea, and Swastha, a 24/7 mental health support system. With over 26,000 seafarers already using their tools, this is a company operating right at the intersection of safety, well-being, and digital adoption on board. Meei, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. It's good to be here.
I'm really excited to have you on. For anybody that's listened to the podcast knows I started off looking at digital tools, digital platforms, but over time I've expanded to crew and communication and the use of their tools. And you fit right in the middle of all this. But I'd love to hear, how did you get to this point? Because it's a really interesting one. And I think it's a super important part of the industry.
Thank you, Chris. It is a very, very important part of the industry. I've spent 20 years of my career in shipping, and most of this 20 years has been in ship owning. So one thing I've realized that never really changed in the last 20 years is crew welfare and how we are treating the seafarers. There's a lot of technology coming into the industry, a lot of technology coming to decarbonizations. As you have seen, you are in this space, you're doing digitalizations. What I've seen, very little investment has been put into crew welfare. Like I said, over the 20 years, we have seen some solutions, but again, this is a very, very slow pace technology that's being adopted to look after our seafarers better. So this is how I ended up here. And I think another very important reason is, as a ship owner, if you look at the hierarchy of shipping, ship owners are always on top. And the seafarers, most of the time, they're at the bottom. So it is also a bit of my life missions of making sure that, the people at the bottom and the people at the top are actually, they should all be in the same level. Because if you think about it, and the term that you hear all the time, no shipping, no shopping. So for me, if there's no seafarers, there's no ship owners. I think this is the part that we always overlook. If there's no seafarers, there will be no ship owners. You can't move your ships without them around. So this is the reason why I have decided that since this is the area that has not been invested a lot in, I want to see if I can do something about this. This is how I ended up here.
I think that's a great and timely topic. I mean, we're recording this a little over a month into the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. There's been some recent discussions about opening through a negotiated peace deal, just to give the listeners a timing for all of this. But yet, what you don't see reported a lot, although you do see it in some places and recently in mainstream media, are the seafarers. And I think it's really great to hear that you're looking after this, but not just right now, but in totality. What did you see in that relationship that you thought, okay, this needs to be fixed? Where was that disconnect in the gap that you saw was really there between the ship owners and how they run a ship as a business, and then the human in the loop, as you say in AI, that's actually running the business?
Yeah, I think maybe taking one step in a more macro view of shipping is that this is a very important. I mean, we all know shipping moves 90% of the world trade. Without shipping, the world stops. This is very, very important. And seafarers play a very key part of moving these things around. Every time when there's a crisis like whatever we're seeing now, people outside of shipping feel the pain of, without shipping, this is very difficult. Everybody's suffering because of that. But if you look at the industry as a whole and how important seafarers are to the total trade, the global seaborne trade is about 35 trillion. The value, if you put the value of all the world's merchant fleet together, is about 1.6 trillion. The market cap of the entire maritime industry is about 2.2 trillion. If you look at all these big numbers, and then you look on the other side, the workforce of this industry, where, before I started getting into this, I was doing a bit of research on looking at all these things, is that if you look at how many seafarers charities are out there that are supporting, there's a few hundred active seafarers charity now in the world. So you're talking about a multi-trillion dollars business supported by a workforce that rely on charities to help the workforce. that is so broken. I think if you put the two numbers together, you can feel how broken the system is, right? It just doesn't feel right with me that why there's so many seafarers charities supporting our workforce when this is one of the most capital intensive, one of the most wealthy industry in the world. So that link makes me feel that something is broken right there.
I think that's a huge gap. And I think that I've never really thought about it that way, right? In terms of having to rely, not solely, I think. I think there are a lot of part of unions and other organizations, but a large part of kind of seafarers' well-being, mental and physical, is this reliant on the wonderful work that the seafarer missions are doing. And I think it is that disconnect. I've never really thought about it that way. When we talk about well-being, can you give us a little bit in your point of view as being a ship owner and now in your role, what does that look like day to day? And what do people who aren't seafarers or haven't had that exposure, what do you think that they're missing?
I think when you talk about well-being for seafarers, is actually something very simple, right? It's what the seafarers experience day to day on board. And what we always talk about well-being a lot of the times from a ship owner's perspective or somebody ashore is compliance data, right? It's whatever data that you see when we talk a lot about crew well-being is the data that you see a lot of it is based on compliance, right? So, and also how the data are being collected. A lot of these data are collected manually, so it's based on questionnaire. There's very simple things like work rest hours is one of the biggest topic we talk about. Fatigue, as we all know, is one of the biggest issues. But work rest hours is something that, you ask the seafarers, are you working this number of hours? If it is, then you tick the box. So that whole well-being become very, KPI driven, become very compliance driven. But it may be very, very different from a seafarer's perspective, what the person is experiencing on board the vessels, right? I may be complying with my work rest hours, but I may be having other stress. I may have, heat stress the whole day. I will have problem at home. So all these little things, they come together to form the well-being of a seafarer. It's no different to how we feel as a person sitting on shore. Everything that happens to us, our work stress, our family life, finances, everything becomes the well-being of us. For seafarers, the same, but even more difficult for them because they're far away from home. They can't control their finances so easily. But a lot of the stuff that we see as a crew well-being is still very related to compliance data and not what they're experiencing maybe truly on board the vessels. So I think that's that a bit different when you talk about day to day. For a seafarer, it's just very real, like what we are experiencing on shore. Of everything that we go through. It comes to safety, it comes to our health, it comes to our mental health, it comes to our, family issues and everything else. But a lot of times in the industry, when we talk about seafarers' welfare, we relate it to compliance. And the other part of it is we relate it to CSR. Seafarers' wellness is not really CSR. In my opinion, it is not, but it's become that two very talk about topic. Is it compliance? How are we doing for our crew? Then we look at the data, how compliant we are. Being compliant is probably, to me, is just basic. But what about the companies that do very well or the ones that do exceptionally well? So all these different things are kind of not really looked at in the industry when we talk about crew well-being. Again, it's still very driven by some very basic data that we see that is out there.
Talk a little bit about some of the tools that you have and kind of where they're addressing that gap, because I think that that's kind of interesting. Again, we always like to avoid the infomercial, but you do have something here that you're building towards to really lessen that gap, to make the seafarers' welfare less of a checkbox compliance issue and more of a holistic issue. I'd love to hear some of these things that you're looking at and maybe how you arrived at one or two aha moments with the products that you're talking about. 'Cause I think that's always an interesting journey.
Thanks, Chris. I think I have many aha moments, maybe too many. I think this is how I ended up here. I think building this has been one of the most difficult things to do because of seafarers' welfare is something that I think it's very difficult. It's also a topic that I think everybody talk about, but it's very hard to build solutions that actually it has to fit many different things, right? So we look at a gap and see, why is there such a big gap? Is this a problem that is solvable? Is it because there's no technology, or that is technology is not addressing the problem? So when I was looking at the gap, a bit like what I said earlier, a lot of the data reporting now that we see is based on compliance data. And a lot of the data are being collected are manual collections, which means we also know seafarers, they maybe because of many reasons, they are not able to, tell the full truth about what they're experiencing on vessels. I should be very honest here. So I think it's to look at every aspect of their life, a bit like what I said earlier, because like each one of us that is sitting in the office, every aspect of the seafarer's life will impact what they do. You talk about aha moments. I had one aha moments where I was talking to a person at shore about his seafarers who is experiencing financial troubles. And he's asking if I can do something to help with this. And he said, it's very, very urgent. So I said, does he really need money that badly? Or what is the urgency? He said, it's because when he's worried about money at home, because he can't send money to his children, this will impact him in his mental, and this will impact his safety, because he will now feel, he will be worried, and he might not do things in the safest way that he would normally do things. So I didn't expect somebody worrying about money would suddenly, that his safety is compromised also. So I thought that's all these very interesting parts of a seafarer's life that, in each of them, because there is, to be honest, there is so many solutions out there, and people all do it with the intention to help the seafarers. But some of these solutions will have gaps that, like I say, we have to look at each one of them and see if we can address. So if I can give you some example, we talk about work rest hours. A lot of the work rest hours is based on, you ask the seafarer, did you work 8 hours today? Did you sleep? And then they say yes. And this data is recorded. So I think, again, that does not really show the true data. So the true data would be somebody wearing a device that says, I recorded your actual sleep work rest hours. You're exposed to heat today for 8 hours, and, you were exposed to noise, and that's all this, your heart rate was not normal. And all this should be the actual data to say, okay, is the crew safe or not? So again, it comes down to having the solutions that is more holistic and also is actual data rather than just a questionnaire.
Well, and it also more reflective of exactly what's going on, because I also look at that, being an ex-seafarer, again, a long time ago. Okay. In the 90s, man, that was, no, it wasn't a sail ship, but it was a ship built in 1962. But I could tell you, yeah, it was an old, but it had 1.75-inch steel. And it had a lightweight. It was an MR in terms of capacity, but it had a lightweight of Afromax. And if you know what that means, you will know it has a lot of steel. I look at that gap, right? And I think it's interesting because you may check the box and say you got 8 hours of sleep, but it may not necessarily be a continuous 8 hours of sleep. It's depending on the wash that you're on, depending on were you docking, undocking, was there maybe some storms and you couldn't get a good night's sleep, right? So having wearables or being a little bit more tuned into how that 8 hours or whatever the rest period was actually gotten, I think could really offer an interesting window into the health and well-being of seafarers.
Yeah, I think Chris is absolutely right. Like I say, it has to be done in a very systematic way rather than a very, a manual compliant kind of way, right? I know it's very hard. I mean, as a ship owner, I know it is hard to, to be compliant and then to make sure that there are just so many layers in between that, taking care of seafarers is not as straightforward as well. I do understand that. But again, it's also providing them with the care as a person. As sea also, I feel ship owners should also have the duty to take care of them ashore, right? One of the areas that I see that is a big gap is on health, medication, medicine, and on this part, on medical aid. Because when you're at sea, when you're a seafarer, so when you're at sea, when you're on ship, when you're not well, you have to tell your captain you're not well, and then they probably have to call the office, and there's a lot of hesitation to report that you're sick because of all the consequences that can come with it. So whatever that they experience at sea, and when they come on shore, the data for their health is also lost, right? So there's no continuous of care. So it's different from how in the office, we're sitting in the office, if we're not well, we go see the same doctor. So we have the data of how we've been. So if a seafarer has been sailing for 10 years and has been changing ships, that data, their health data is maybe lost. They do not get continuous of care when they come on shore. The few months when they're not working at sea, when they're short, they are not protected. So again, if we truly look at taking good care of them, and if there are solutions that actually look at taking care of them from their sea at the shore is something that we should explore, right? I think the continuous of care or seafarer is missing in the industry right now.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting thing. And I think you point out to the other piece of the seafarer's mentality in terms of, and I think this is just a worker's mentality, not necessarily seafarers, but many, many workers where you have to show up to work on a job site is, I don't want to tell the boss anything. I don't know if I want to put in recording kind of some of the stuff that I actually did. Maybe not for a recording, but all I know is that I know of a seafarer. It may or may not have been me that got injured, and I may or may not have been given a bunch of money and went told to go to the hospital, but don't put it on your insurance because we were ashore and it wasn't a big injury. It was just needed some stitches. But the point is we didn't want to tell the office. Captain said, here's some money. May have said that. Go to the hospital, get yourself stitched up, and don't report it.
Absolutely. Exactly.
And it was no big deal. I'm no worse. Well, the seafarer is no worse for wear. But the point is that mentality, I don't think really has changed. The question that I have is, so you let's say you introduce these things, you're out there in 26,000 seafarers. And you kind of mentioned something else, which is an important topic that has come up before. And that is, things like decarbonization and other parts of digitalization. You're requiring more and more of the seafarer in terms of these types of tools, whether it's ammonia bunkering, whether it's we have a new digital tool to monitor efficiency and everything in between. And now you're giving them this, which in theory is for them, but I think there are some people out there who could be suspicious of this. Talk a little bit about the feedback you get when you roll this out to ships. Is it generally positive because it's like, oh, somebody's looking out for me? Or is it generally, here we go again. Here's some stuff the headquarters wants. This is all just, they want to watch me. They don't trust me. How is that? How is what you're trying to do being received by the seafarers? Everybody from the steward's department up to the captain, right? Because we always look at the captain, chief engineer, but you have a steward's department. You have ordinary seamen or whatever the ranks are called today, or engine room hands. You have those folks, and they have an important role to play. So I'd love to hear what the reception is and how the feedback is when you bring this on board.
I want to say it's all of the above. All of the above that you explain is the mixtures of everything. I think like all things, we also experience the same thing where any type of new technology, you're going to face with a lot of resistance. I think that's just normal. I think there is definitely a very big degree of, just to be extremely honest, a big degree of, I don't want to be watched. Why are you doing this? Who is benefiting from this? Where does my data go? Do I really get the benefit of this, or am I going to be punished for whatever data that you collect? I think adopting any tech is difficult. Adopting any tech with Seafarer is something extremely difficult. I can tell you, Chris, this is probably one of the most difficult things I have done in my life. I think building a shipping company is actually a lot easier than this. I think trying to build tech for seafarers is something incredibly hard to do, but it's meaningful enough. So this is why I'm doing this. I think it's very difficult for seafarers, but what I've seen that is based on the experience that we have had, we're quite a young company, but based on the experience that we have is that the change management of adopting the tech is extremely important. So we have to explain very clearly to the seafarers what does the tech do. If I give an example of the wearables that we have, again, there was a lot of resistance on, so, this data that you collect, how does it benefit me? How does, is it going to be used against me? But when you really explain to them, we've done a lot of work on this, to explain to them how this is protecting them. And then you show them the results on how that is protecting them. I think then it will have to take time. Over time, they really see the benefit. So recently we did a survey on a few thousands of our seafarers that are using the wearables, asking them, do you feel safer wearing the watch, or do you not feel any difference? And surprisingly, almost, all of them said they feel safer. I think it's also that mindset change of, wearing the watch, something that, like one of the things we explain a lot to them is that people will spend money buying an Apple Watch. They spend money buying a Whoop to tell them data. So this is there to really to protect you. The data also belongs to them, and then that they can use it. It's really a tool to protect them. So a lot of education has to happen. Change management has to be driven by the companies themselves. They have to believe this is going to be helping the seafarers. So I think it's a collaborative work between the seafarers, the companies, and also the superintendent that are actually sitting in the office saying, why is this important for you? So I think it's a three collaborations between three different, segments of making sure that this is useful for them.
Of those three, who's really the driver for this? Is this coming from the seafarers, or is this coming more from the technical managers or the head owners or the charters even? It's not like, who is really driving this? And then, then we get into the, as they say here, the third rail of, well, who's paying for this, right? Because that's one of the things with the seafarers missions, like, oh, well, people can, you can play that game and just say, well, it's just the missions will come out to the ship and we don't pay for it. We just let them come on and have coffee, right? So it just costs me a coffee and maybe lunch. So I'm kind of curious about like, who is driving this? And then at the end of the day, who's paying for it? And then how are the benefits being utilized? I think it's kind of like these three questions kind of go together. Curious to see how you are facing that.
It's one of the key considerations, right, when the company was started to do this, because tech adoption is difficult. So it depends on the type of tech we have. So we have 4 different techs, right? So for the safety tech, again, it has to be driven by the people that pay for it, the companies, the ship owners who pay money for this and say, you now have to use this. But they will be driving it at the beginning. If the tech does not work, you can drive all you want. The seafarers, if they don't see that this is really helping them, they're not going to use it. So they themselves will not drive this. So it comes with 2 parts. The first part is, the ship owners or the guys sitting in the office, because for the safety of the seafarers, they're driving this at the beginning. To be very honest, in a lot of cases is also, basically making sure that the seafarers use it, right? There's a lot of this, making it into a requirement that they use it. But if the tech is not working, eventually the seafarers will not use it also. So every tech, our tech or any tech that is created for seafarers out there has to be something that is really working. Otherwise, you can drive it all you want. A company can make it a regulations or a compliance, thing. But if it's not working, if it's going to add more stress to the seafarer's life, then it will never work. It will never work. So I think the driving is 2 parts. First you have the company, and then it's the seafarers doing it themselves. For the other techs that we have where we don't require the company to be involved, then the tech has to work well, that the seafarers really see the benefit of it. Otherwise, there is just no point. There is no point of creating something that only solves half the problem for them.
Yeah, no, I get it. Right. You always have to have a technology that works and that delivers on the promise, because one of the tricky part is even if you have, let's say it works really well for 70% of the people, that 30% or even that 20% could upset the apple cart so much. And I've had that experience wearing my product management hat. And I was like, yeah, but your other offices like love it. And there one office that for a product that I managed just didn't use it because it didn't have one feature they wanted. And it made sense. And, I used to be in a role that they had, but their kind of resistance to that, which brings me up to another question, which I think is interesting is are you starting to see a fairly significant cultural shift where people want to adapt this technology more? And I think that question really starts in the office. Are you seeing folks who are, as you said in the beginning, the value of the cargo move, the ships, and to the economy is so high that if you look at improving efficiencies with the seafarers, in other words, keeping them happy, keeping them on board, having repeat seafarers so you don't have to teach them over and over your specific way of working. Are you seeing that mindset shift in the office environment to say, hey, we need to invest in these tools? Do you think that that's culturally happening? And once the tools are out, do you feel that, let's say it works 100% or close enough to 100%, that seafarers are going to be more and more amicable to these devices?
Yeah, I think that is definitely a huge cultural mindset change that we see now. I think because crew welfare is so important and everybody talks about it so much, and there's more data being out there that people can look at the data and know that this whole thing that people talk about, seafarers need to be looked after better, is real. So I think the mindset change is there, but it's very, very slow. Again, that's the practical aspect of, so yes, we know we need to treat the seafarers better. There are tools out there. okay, then it comes back to who's paying for it. So the who is paying for it becomes, I would say, it becomes a bit of a driving decisions for a lot of the companies. I think maybe a little bit more shift that I've seen at the moment is that people are not looking at crew welfare as a part of CSR. So if people can spend a bit more effort in looking at it as this is actually risk management, because when your crew is more exposed to risk, it actually become bigger operational risk for the company as well. So I also see the little shift on how people are looking at it as risk rather than this is doing the right thing. This is treating our crew better. This is CSR. To me, it's also not CSR because it's something about operationally safer. I look at risk management my whole life. So it's about how when you have all these tools to help the seafarers, even including things like financial tools, where they now stop worrying about the family and then focusing on work, actually lower your operational risk for the company. So I think if people look at it as some kind of, okay, if I do this, if I provide all these tools, all these digitalizations for the crew, what does it mean for my risk management? Is it lower or is it higher? That shift will help a lot of people make better decisions. But it's always a very, very difficult topic, right? As you know, that it's so hard because it's very hard to quantify when you treat your crew better. As your performance, is that really better? Is there a real return on doing all?
One of the things that I find really interesting is, trying to link that to risk. And I think that that's an interesting way of doing it. But you also point out the other part, which is it's very hard to quantify. But I will argue that it's hard to quantify in the short term. I think there is actually, if I were to guess, I bet there is a long-term 1+ years. You're talking about multiple deployments with multiple crews that a majority are looking after welfare, that you could probably point to getting to like some sort of statistical analysis where you could say this crew did better. And again, it's very hard to do because you have different work environments, different cargoes, different rotations, different ports, and all these sort of different things. It's so many variables. It's hard to capture, but I think it's an interesting way of looking at it. When you approach the shoreside staff with that, are they looking at it more that way, do you think? Because of, we're seeing risk now everywhere, whether it's the Strait to Hormuz or increase the amount of weather events, risk is much higher than it used to be.
Yeah, no, I think when you speak, also, of course, depends on, who you speak to on the shore side, but people are definitely seeing the risk because it's becoming, like you say, whatever that's happening now, that risk has become so real to them. And it also makes their job more difficult. So I think definitely I'm seeing the shift of people are looking at it more as risk management rather than just, doing this because we want to do the right thing. It is more than doing the right thing. It's also making sure that operationally you are at less risk. Because we have seen, I think also with more data now being put out there, fatigue is a very big issue. So a lot of the incidents happen because of fatigue. The human error is there. So it's very hard to quantify, but there is enough data that people will start to at least pay attention to the topic rather than just saying we are treating our crew better. It's more than just about giving them a little bit more money on their victualling and things like that, right? It's really a lot more on, how do we control the risk and how is this impacting the company?
So if you have somebody that's on the fence about employing some of your services, what is the one elevator pitch? What is the one thing that you would say to them to say, hey, I really think you should make this leap and sign up for our services? What is that one thing that you push that you like to point out to the potential clients that you sell to?
This is a difficult question, but this is also a question that I face all the time. I think, as you know, trying to sell tech for seafarers is extremely difficult, and also because people don't see the return. I think that especially for the safety product that we have, what I always say is human lives are priceless. You just need to save one life or half a life to make all your money back. It is, if you think about it, it's really a no-brainer, but of course, that person has to believe in that. I think usually it's a difficult thing to convince people, but it's more about the human, how priceless human lives are.
That's a good pitch. I don't disagree with you. I think that especially as companies, ownership and leadership start to generationally change, I think there's more and more opportunity for this. I also think the general public understand what seafarers do. I mean, we're just seeing what's happening right now, and they understand that, we can't get helium, which I never really thought about, but helium is super important to make all these other products. And it's a byproduct of something that happens, in my case, sitting here in the U.S., 8,000, 10,000 miles away, but it's really important to all these other things. I was having a chat with my dentist, seriously, and we were talking about rubber gloves may become surgical gloves, which he uses, may become a little bit, the supply chain may become stretched because of many of the inputs are sitting in the Gulf. That may not necessarily cause a problem here in the United States, but it will raise prices. And how does all that stuff get transported? Well, ships. And who's on those ships? Well, seafarers. So I'd like to think that if there's a silver lining of what's going on in the world right now, it's that people realize that there are people, like you said, human lives at sea, transporting these goods in a war zone that they don't have any sort of business being in. These are not war fighters. These are seafarers. And I think it's anything that folks like yourself, Meei, can do, and others to raise that profile is really important. So I think that's great. Before I let you go, we talked a little bit before. Thank you for listening to the podcast. So this next question. What are you reading? And are you writing anything? And that's okay if you're writing something.
I have not sat down. I used to write. I enjoy writing a lot. I used to write diaries every day. At the moment, I'm reading something quite interesting. Of all the questions you asked, that is my most favorite one because I read a lot. So, I'm reading a book called Train to Pakistan. I don't know if you've heard of this book. Actually, I have it here.
Okay.
So it's a book that I bought. So I go to India a lot. So it's a book I bought in India a few months ago. It's about the partition between Pakistan and India. So it's kind of timely to read this right now, I feel. It's about, it's 1947. It's fictional, but it's based on real photos that a photographer took during that time of train arriving in a village in India, but everybody on the train was killed.
Yeah.
And a lot of these events actually happened. So it is a very, very good book. It talks a lot about humanity. I love to read books about war and humanity. So it's about humanity and how decisions made somewhere else impacted so many lives and so many lives were killed. So it's a very, very good book. I would highly recommend that. But it's quite grim because they have real photos of the event.
That is fascinating. And I think more to your point, decisions made thousands of miles away. We are seeing it play out right now, unfortunately, impacting, the second mate on some container ship just trying to make money and send it back to his family, maybe in India or maybe in Pakistan or maybe in the Philippines. If you like that sort of impact and war book, there was a book written recently in the last maybe 5-10 years called A Woman of No Importance. Okay.
I've never heard of this. Okay.
Fabulous book. I'll give you the synopsis. And it sounds like fiction, but it's not. It's not even historical fiction. It's a real story. It's about an American woman that ended up having an accident, lost her leg. This was in the 20s and 30s. But then she ended up being part of the French resistance during World War II. So, and the Nazis never found her. Now, the interesting thing, if you think about it, a woman with one leg managed to avoid the Nazis. Pretty interesting stuff. And it talks about her journeys, and actually it refers to, I believe it was one of the first Pakistani women, British women, who was actually killed by the Nazis. There was a movie about this. I forgot the name of the movie, but there was a movie that talked a little bit about this as well. Fabulous.
I'm going to go.
Fabulous book. It reads like nonfiction. It doesn't read like fiction. It reads like fiction, not like nonfiction. Like I said, Meei,
amazing. No.
It's a great Woman of No Importance. Yeah, I think the book is, I'm just looking it up here. Yeah, Woman of No Importance. It's by Sonia Perel and Juliet. Sonia Perel with Sonia Purnell. And I think it was in the last couple of years. Yeah, best book of the year, 2019. 7 years old. Like I said, great.
Same question. What are you reading right now?
I'm bad. I'm really bad. I want to read. I'm reading something called Measure What Matters, which is about OKRs, which is more business related. I occasionally read a Star Wars book. I'm a Star Wars nerd. There's one coming out soon, which I'm looking forward to, because if one of my favorite shows has been Andor, which takes place right before Rogue One, and it's some novelization around the times, filling in the blanks of some of the Andor episodes, which is kind of cool. I'm a nerd. I've seen all the live action Star Wars movies in the movie theater, every single one. Because that's how old I am. So yeah. So thank you for asking that. I appreciate it. Makes me feel old. Meei, this was a fantastic journey and chat. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I wish you the best of luck, especially as you go out there and work with seafarers and companies and really highlight one of the most important issues, I think, of not only our time, but of a long time. And I think it's something that's overdue. And thank you for the work that you're doing, and wishing you the most success with your company.
Thank you, Chris. It's really nice talking to you. It is very enlightening. And I always like to tell the story, but to tell the story this way is something that I really enjoy. Thank you very much for that.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.